So, Brother Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to join. I want to just talk a little bit about you, and then turn it over to you to talk a little bit about yourself. I just want to let people know that Brother Ron Chisom is the co-founder of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, and he is my mentor and teacher. I have learned so much from him. Even and the People's Institute has 10 principles. And if you have not been onto their website, you should go onto their website and look at the 10 principles. But those 10 principles really were the foundation for my creation of the SHARP framework. And for those of you who don't know, SHARP stands for structural oppression, so looking at structural oppression, historical context, so we understand the importance that history plays in understanding racism. The A is for analysis of role, understanding that each one of us has a role to either disrupt or to maintain the racism and oppression that we see in our communities. The R is for reciprocity and mutuality, this idea that we are in a two-way relationship, a bi-directional relationship. We are not going in to save people. We are working with people and forming relationships with them so that they can recognize their power, which is what P stands for. But the ultimate goal of the work we do is for people to recognize and walk in their own power. And Brother Ron has been doing this work for, oh, I don't know, Brother Ron, over 60 years, right?
Yeah, give or take a year.
Over 60 years, give or take a year. And Brother Ron has been really instrumental in making some very significant changes in our society. And one of the biggest changes that we can point to is in 1984, he sued the Louisiana State Supreme Court because there were no Black justices on the Supreme Court. And he created a seat that was now called the Chisom seat on the Louisiana State Supreme Court. And first Black Justice, Burnett Johnson was put in that seat. And they have fought a hard fight, even up till, I think it was last year, this Chisom seat is still being challenged by Louisiana legislators. They do not want to be able to see Black people have the amount of power that they would have as they are justices on the state Supreme Court. So we continue to see this fight happen. It's not over. That's why, we're not just looking at history when we think about racism, we're also seeing what is happening present day, every single day, what we are dealing with. And so Brother Ron has been fighting these fights and organizing. You are at heart an organizer, right, Brother Ron?
Yes, all the way.
People. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your work, so people know a little bit more about you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Wendy. I'm just glad to be part of this discussion and listen and learn and share. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I've been here all of my life for 82 years. I've been married for 59 years. I have 2 grandkids, and my daughter and my grandkids are part of this training. As I was doing my work in New Orleans, I never knew about training. I didn't want to train. I just wanted to be a helper. I wanted to be like a social worker. I want to, I didn't have social work background, but I wanted to help people. So I began to organize. I didn't know I was an organizer, but I would bring people. If you ever visit New Orleans, I don't know how many folks I like to see any folks have been to New Orleans before, but if you ever, a lot of people go to the French Quarter, but they don't come to one of the oldest Black neighborhoods in the United States called Treme, Treme. There was an HBO series where they talk about the culture of New Orleans and Katrina. I was in one of those HBO series where I represented community. But as I was doing my work in New Orleans, never started this training, what I noticed every time we bring primarily Black folks together to deal with some injustice, we wind up fighting each other. And I didn't understand that. I had an organization, and instead of fighting people downtown, we fight each other. So I didn't know what that was about. So I thought if I got some training, I'd be more effective to help groups stop that internal stuff. So I got trained by a man named Saul Alinsky. That's Alinsky. He has a book out called Rules for Radicals. So I went to a place called Midwest Academy, and they taught me the skills on how to become a good organizer. So I spent several weeks there. I came back to New Orleans to apply these great skills, thinking I would deal with some of the internal stuff. That was in my mind. As I say, I got a lot of great skills, but what I realized, skills alone will not make you an effective worker. Because we say if you give somebody some skills and they haven't dealt with their racism, they can become a skillful racist and go to school and get certified. So what I realized that I didn't understand it. So eventually, when I met Dr. Jim Dunn, who was the co-founder of the People's Institute, Jim Dunn told me, he said, man, if we're going to be effective in doing community work, social work, we got to understand racism. Whereas a Black man, nobody could tell me that I didn't understand racism. But what I realized, I understood being a victim of racism, but I did not have a systemic analysis. I had a needs analysis. I had a do-gooder analysis. I want to help them poor Black folks analysis. I had something called a white man's burden analysis, which means I got to take care of them folks because they really can't take care of themselves. That's when I realized if I'm going to be effective to do any kind of social work, social change, advocacy work, I must understand that racism, because when you look at every movement for change, whether it's the women's movement, the populist movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, racism got to stop the movement. So if I want to be an effective social change agent, I must understand racism, and not only from a needs analysis, but from a systemic analysis. So we've trained people all over the world. We've trained close to, in 45 years, 44 years, we've trained almost 2 million people. That's in South Africa, that's in every part of the country. And one of most, every city, every Puerto Rico, Japan, England. And one of the hardest places to do this work was in New York City, because a lot of folks think they know everything in New York. Now, I'm doing a generalization. It took us a long time to get this training into New York. And now that we're there, we do work. We do more work in New York than we're in the country right now. Because when you're progressive, you think you don't need to understand racism. Progressive just means you're in a box, but you get closer to the periphery of the box. So, we work with young people. This work has to be intergenerational. And what I didn't want to happen, and I'll say this, and it took me a while to understand this here. If I'm going to do social work, community work, advocacy work, I don't want this to be a dependency model. I want this to, you start off being independent, but ultimately interdependent. The community got to control its own destiny. And I find so many organizations, in my experience working at social work school at Columbia, Fordham, NYU, Hunters College, Simmons College in Boston, they're doing important work, but I find when social workers come out of school, they have no sense of racism, and they're doing good work, but they're doing it more in making people dependent on them. And then when they leave the community, things collapse. But when they lose a grant, they collapse. So I want to make sure that I understand to take people through a process that leads up, because all the steps are important: dependency, independency, but then you got to go to interdependency, where community have their own voice and not only respond to issues, but know how to prevent issues. So I said a lot, but I just wanted to
Good.
give a.
No, that's perfect. And so I want to pick up on a couple of things you said, because Brother Ron, the reality is that our profession of social work has a real problem around learning how to be skillful racists. Because although we talk, and if you go to our code of ethics, we talk a lot about the importance of understanding racism and oppression. It's really not built into our education system. And so it's really up to individual social workers to decide to learn about racism, to learn about oppression, and to develop that analysis you've been talking about. You talked a lot about how challenging it is for people who are progressive to really pay attention to their own racism. And I will tell you that I came to the School of Social Work from the Department of Defense. And I will tell you that in the Department of Defense, it was easier to talk to people about racism than it has been at the School of Social Work. And that is because very often when we are progressive, as you said, we are still inside the box. We're closer to the edge. So sometimes we
Mhm.
think we are further along than we actually are, and it's hard for us to learn. So, you know, talk a little bit about this idea that um, that we, as we become more skillful in our tools and techniques, but not necessarily our analysis, that we are really working on a needs analysis. And I know that when you talk about that, you're talking about needs like people need housing and people need food and people need healthcare. All of those things are important, right? So Brother Ron, you were talking about um, skillful racists and how just learning tools and techniques alone does not give you the analysis that you
That's correct.
need. Talking a little bit about the fact that social workers, because we tend to be so progressive, we can actually be far more resistant to understanding how much racism shows up in us. And we tend to be sometimes not that humble about the fact that we need to develop an analysis. One of the things you said that I want to pick up on is you talked about how so many people who want to help others are working on a needs analysis. And we understand that everybody does have needs. People need food and shelter and healthcare. All of those things are critical. But can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by a needs analysis? And if the needs analysis is not where we should be focusing our attention, where should we be focusing our attention?
Yeah, it shouldn't be either or. That it's got to be both, but we need to understand in the right context. Social workers are very key to this work because most of them are on the front line. Most of them have been developed to help people, and you want to do it be helpful in a very humanistic way. We have not been trained to be helpers in a humanistic way. We've been trained as social workers to be helping in a technical way, and technical and skills and tools are crucial. What racism has done historically and presently, it has dehumanized us. That's number one. Understand it. So even though we help people, it's not in a humanistic way. And then once we get tools and skills, it sometimes it adds further to dehumanize us. So you got to make sure you have schools and skills and tools, but you got to have humanity. Because if you want to make real changes, you got to have a humanistic approach. Because institutions and systems will use those skills and tools better than we can use them. And the system, why you got to do your work in a humanistic way, you got to understand that most social workers, when they go out, they get their practicum, they're learning from the community groups. A lot of times the community groups are not clear what they're doing, but you got to go get those practicum because that's part of what they tell you how to do in school. And sometimes community groups don't get challenged enough because sometimes community groups ain't nothing but a clique. And sometimes I call it cliquism, which is another aspect of racism. And you have to say their community group ain't with 3 people in it. They say their community group, they don't have no community meetings. Matter of fact, they want to do community work long distance. They do that because they're afraid to go in the community. Because even the community that we serve as social workers, the community itself has been dehumanized. And community will play games with us. So what I realized, if I'm going to be effective as real social, I must understand where needs come from. People have needs. Most organizations that I work with, most social workers work with groups. Every one of the groups they work with, usually in their mission statement, they'll have, I'm going to empower the community. Sounds good, but they haven't done a power analysis. What they've done a needs analysis or a needs assessment, which is very, very important. But until you understand where that needs come from, you'll only be perpetuating the problem, and you really will be adding to the oppression of the people you're trying to lift that oppression from. Because most needs don't lift oppression. Most needs, when you give people services, creates dependency. So, and that adds to the oppression, really ultimately add to their death. So you got to understand, you've got to have a systemic analysis. Most of us are not taught how to do a systemic analysis. The other thing is that when you come from these schools that teaches that, you're coming from a white organizational culture. And white organizational culture make you operate the way they want you to operate. They want to develop bureaucrats, and they can utilize social workers like that to maintain a bureaucracy. And you maintain a bureaucracy by keep giving people services, but not developing people so they can prevent some of these problems, and also advocate for themselves or advocate with the social worker. So we saying that the groups need to understand this power arrangement, this power analysis. And what I found in my experience with many social workers, I'm making a general statement, that most social workers don't see themselves in partnership with the community. They see themselves as doing something for the community, but the community really is doing something for them. But they don't pick that up because they've been trained just to help. They don't realize that they need help as well.
So, Brother Ron, this is really important. So, when you talk about the needs analysis versus the power analysis, what I hear you saying is that the needs are just the symptom, but that we've got to dig beneath those needs to look at what created those needs to begin with, because we social workers are very often running around meeting needs, but what we should be doing is going upstream and looking at the issues that created those needs, dealing with those issues up there so that people don't have the needs to begin with, right? And you talked about the power analysis versus a needs analysis. Needs analysis is important, but can you tell us what is a power analysis and why should we do it?
Well, for me, for years, I was operating out of the needs, and I didn't understand. I would talk power, I would talk about empowerment, and all that. I would use all that kind of language, but didn't understand what it was about. So when I began to start, me and the team I work with began to start doing this work, we really, if we're gonna make that word empowerment real, you got to understand, you got to do some sort of a power analysis. So we developed at the People's Institute where we do a power analysis. Now, sometimes when I work in the community and I bring this term power analysis to the general community, they don't, that language gets a little bit intimidating. So I say this, instead of using word power analysis, if people are getting stumped on and beat on, instead of calling it power now, we call it a foot identification. We want to identify the foot that's oppressing our communities. But then what I realized, even as social workers, they got a foot on social work neck too. But nobody got a program for social workers. We so busy developing a program that we need a program. Matter of fact, social workers get so anesthetized by the foot, they don't even know they don't even know they're getting kicked by the foot. That's what that helping mentality will do for you. So we dealt with this power analysis. Every time we do a 2.5-day workshop. And we lead up to it. You don't start right away with a power analysis. You got to do some basic steps. Because what has happened to us in our community has been a process to make us dependent, make us hurt. So in order to really understand the power analysis, you got to take people through a process, through steps. So in our workshop, we put up this power analysis, or this foot ID, what we call it, foot. And then we talk about communities, could be a white, black, brown, native, age communities. And we ask the participants themselves, the people that have these needs, to talk about drawing their community. Like you had this really fatality happen with this bridge. I mean, and that's very sad, and our prayers are out to folks. Well, in some of our community, we have bridges, we have interstates, we've got potholes, we've got abandoned cars, you got all railroad tracks. And in the workshop, everybody will put that on real graphically so they can see it. Now, we're developing a power analysis, but you don't start talking about power. You got to build it up step by step and let people contribute to it. A lot of people want to do everything, but don't want the community to be involved with it. So we go right in the community and we do this training, and they start explaining what's the reality for them. And they put all these graphic things up themselves. See, because we have to get people to think about what is a system, what are institutions? Because an assumption, a system don't teach you about that, because a system or institution that we graduate from don't want to learn too much about them. So they operate out of a needs. They don't want you to peep that real whole card about how they really operate in a very inhuman way. And then we graduate from that kind of dynamics. So we do this graphic, everybody participate in it. And then after we draw a particular community, then we talk about institutions and systems. An institution would be like the police department. What makes it a system is when the judicial and penal work with the police, it becomes the criminal justice system. So we ask folks in the room to think, use their mental muscle to think about how institutions and systems impact the community, which creates needs. And so what I've found is very difficult when you've been operating out of needs for so long that it's hard to think about systems well, now you got to really begin to analyze it. Because remember, we're calling this a power analysis. We want to analyze power. Now, more people can write grants, get money, do all this stuff, but you got to take time to analyze. You got to identify the power, then you got to analyze it. So what I found, people take a long time to name an institution. They'll say, well, because when you're not conditioned to think systemically, it's hard to now write it up. So eventually we get that mental muscle work. So eventually they say, well, the police, judicial, housing, the educational system. A lot of folks talk about education system. See, all the systems that we talk about are broken. Every system that transportation, housing, health, they're broken, but we have no programs to fix them. We're fixing people. All we're doing is really fixing people's behavior. And if that's all you're doing, that's a tragedy, to be only fixing people's behavior when the behavior comes from years of oppression. So we draw this power analysis on the board and show how all these institutions and systems are around our community. And we help people in the community, really social workers, advocates, grassroots, for anybody. We ask them to really look at this, how this, because these system institutions, people don't have one need, they have a bunch of needs. That's what systems do. People think, well, I got a housing problem, a health problem. No, most of our communities that we give services to have a lot of these problems because it's an arrangement, this power. So, what we do, we begin to analyze how does the educational system create our community. We don't rush it. We think we're going to be effective in giving services. You've got to understand this arrangement because most of us really want to be proficient, efficient, really want to help. We don't want to create dependency because we have not analyzed the system they've taken up. We're too busy trying to get stuff done. That comes out of a white culture. You can be a person of color, but we operate from a white cultural dynamic. We don't know we're doing it. And now that white people, sometimes because of changes, we put people of color in those roles and we're now mimicking white people. Same thing. Could have put the white people right back, but and sometimes we do bring them back because then we start dealing with all of our internal stuff, even as leaders, and that really gets done because one of the things that we found with a systemic analysis, it creates injustice, it creates needs, but it also creates a pathology. See, we've been sick a long time, we've never been treated for it. So a good social worker who have principles guiding their work could be very therapeutic for the community as well as for themselves if they see themselves in there with the community. But most social workers, it's going to take a long time to see themselves as part of the community because they've learned from the community, they've got their jobs from the community. They have to count the numbers of people they serve to keep their money, but they still don't see themselves in relationship or in partnership.
That's deep.
Yeah, but it's elementary.
It is elementary, but it's not the way we usually frame the work we do. Usually we frame the work as, us really being there as good people to help communities, to support communities. But as you've said, if we are not looking at how people create interdependence with us, then we really are just simply creating dependency. So I get that. I think, I wanted to go back to something you said about social workers having feet on us. We have feet on us too. You're absolutely right. Just think about the large caseloads that some social workers have to deal with in some agencies. You cannot possibly build a strong relationship with 50 families on your caseload, right? And so the time limits and the pressures and the get things done sort of mentality is so much a part of how white supremacy continues to maintain this arrangement, because we can't possibly dig into the work when we are so very transactional, right? So very fast, quick touches. There's not that much we can do. But there's something else you talked about in the power analysis when you talked about things like even physical structures, like looking at bridges and roads, and we can walk through a community. If we don't have the right lens, we will miss all the signs of the power that has impacted that community. So for example, when we walk through a community, very often when we see people who are, so overweight and they may have diabetes and high blood pressure, we have all these programs about helping people eat right and helping people cook right and helping people learn about obesity. But it is very rare in these programs that we hear of a program to deal with the fact that there are no grocery stores in so many Black communities, and that there are no corporate grocery stores that are willing to come into Black communities and provide with people with safe and affordable, nutritious food. But we're so focused on the people who are overweight and eating the chicken boxes, but that's all they have access to. So,
Right.
so much of our work, if we don't have the lens of what power looks like in the community, we miss so much. And we keep on focusing on individuals. And that in and of itself, as you have said, is dehumanizing.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. See, when we say our lenses are not clear, that's what racism has done to us. And all the other oppression, sexism, classism. But we don't care what kind of oppression you deal with. Anytime you add color to it, the oppression doubles. So our lenses are not clear because of the schools we go to. Schools don't do this stuff to open up our minds. It gets us there so we can graduate and get the degree, or get the paper, as they always say. You got to get the paper. But there's a price to get that paper, because something happens to us, even as social workers, by the time we graduate. We're prepared to give services, which is important. But does our services that we give wake people up? Does it put them asleep? And then we can't, because racism will make our eyes not clear. That's why for social workers, in order to get clarity in the eyes to see really what you need to be doing, you got to be in partnership with that community, and you got to do your work in an anti-racist way. Racism takes away humanity. See, because I can say, we studied, when you study the power arrangement, we don't study the pathology. We don't study the internalized oppression piece. Most of it deal with, we need housing, we need health, we need better food. That's correct. But that pathology, that telling white people that they're superior, people of color we inferior, and then telling people from around the world, as people of color, when they come to this country, don't deal with Black people. They've been told before they even got it, whether it's the Caribbean, African, Europe, anywhere, all this stuff is going on, and it's in our communities, and we're not working together. When you look at organizations, we don't work together inside social work schools, and not only in the community. You can be different people of color. We don't do, because the ethnocentrism is playing out right there. And until we understand the sickness in us, and get that toxicity out of us, and we have an opportunity, because everything we've gotten in our lives, I know in the Black community, has been through organizing, has been through social work, it has been to the Black church. All these things have kept us alive. But we're saying, there's an opportunity here. And matter of fact, we need social workers more than ever before, because the climate of this country right now, I mean, it's disgraceful what's going on. But we got to wake our community up. So part of your service is wake them up, open up their eyes. That's develop leadership. When you develop the leadership, you got to have accountability with it. You can't just develop leadership. You've got to have accountability with it, because some of the leaders we develop will turn on you. So you got to have both. But that becomes the therapy to deal with the toxicity in the social workers as well as the community. We're all suffering from this dynamic. We're all suffering. It's not either or right now. The community needs help. Social work need help. Because remember, this work is an inside job and it's an outside job. You got problems inside the institution. You need some social workers inside the institution to do some work as well external.
You said something that really sort of touches me, and well, you said several things, but one of them is this idea that, I'm an immigrant, so I know that even before I got to this country, I had been told, and I had been really conditioned to believe that Black Americans were inferior. I had already heard that by the time I got here, right? And so, but when I'm walking down the street, nobody knows whether I'm African American, African Caribbean, African. I'm Black, right? I am part of this community. But you're right. There is this division that has been sown in. And, we also see how, when you talk about this internalized racism, how so many organizations, and I have to look in the mirror for this too, because I'm a Black woman who leads an organization. So many of us are put in the positions that we're put in simply because we will toe the line of white supremacy, right?
Right.
We very, very often, we're not put in this role if we are going to buck the system, if we are looking to wake people up. We're put in this role because, and a lot of you've said this so many times, a lot of organizations don't need to whip us and beat us. They just need to put a Black person in the position of leadership who will maintain the status quo. And that is happening in so many nonprofits. And those are the people that are lauded and lifted up and raised up as wonderful leaders, when in fact, they are part of maintaining the power structure. And it's so dangerous because white people will look at us and say, well, look at that Black leader is saying that this is okay. So therefore, this is what I'm supposed to do. And that is a very common arrangement in social service systems.
That's correct. The other thing for me, Dr. Wendy, is the social work is a helping profession. I've traveled all over the country during these trainings, and what I've found is that if it's a helping profession, why are people not helping young, poor white kids? It's almost disgraceful. Now, people like the Proud Boys and other people are paramilitary, but I don't understand how social workers, I don't care what their background is or what their ethnicity is, you can't leave young white kids out. Because they're going to grow up white and still be confused. That's why it's difficult to work with white adults, because nobody's educating them at an early age.
Right.
You can help all the brown and Black kids you want, but if white kids don't get some help, they're going to grow up white and still be in charge.
Right.
And I'm saying, why are we not helping white kids? And everywhere I travel to deal with their racism or help them to understand what racism is, why it's not happening. And if it's happening in your area, then we need to know about it, because we need to send people over there, because everywhere I've traveled in this country, I don't see nobody really working in a real serious way helping young white kids. And to me, that's I don't see how white people can work, even communities of color, not working on some of their own children. That's, to me, it's a contradiction.
You're right. You're right about that. It's so interesting because it is so common to believe that we as social workers should be out there very focused on Black and brown people. And those of us who think we're working against racism, we are focused on Black and brown people, but that's not where the racism is coming from.
That's right.
So if we are all focused on Black and brown people because we think we're working to end racism, then we must be really saying that Black and brown people are the problem.
That's right.
Instead, we should be working with white people. White children need the same amount, if not more, support to make sure that they understand their position in this system and this structure, right? But we are not doing that work. By and large, it is not widely done. We are so incredibly focused on Black and brown families, communities, and children.
And when a lot of social workers who were white have not been trained to work with their white parents. See, so if it's a helping profession, why are they not taught to help? To just show you some dynamics on how we've been trained as social workers. Yet white families, young white activists I've seen come to our workshop, they run away from home because they say their mom and dad is racist. And what we find out, their mom and dad is a better organizer than them. That's why they run away from home. So we want to be, white people can learn from their parents, but they want to show them one particular way on how to change their way because they're racist. We say all white people are racist because they got privilege. That's all we're really saying. So I just would hope that somebody get real creative. They also needs to get some of the white social workers ought to develop a good history book to show white kids some of their own heroes and sheroes. Besides Malcolm and Martin, white kids all know there's some white people out there have contributed, living now, and some have passed to this struggle, but they don't look at them. If they're going to be real effective, equitable social workers, they got to get deeper than just so busy. Because some people get turned on because they're helping Black and brown kids. They feel good at night. That stuff got to stop. We got to get deep into this understanding and wake people up. But then the social workers got to get woke up as well.
Gosh, there's so much we could talk about. And I know we don't have a whole lot of time before we have to start taking questions, but I do want to just throw this one thing out there for people to think about, because one of the things I've heard you talk about so much is how much racism dehumanizes white people, and that white people have experienced this process of systematic dehumanization to bring them to the place that they are today, right? You've talked a lot about, you know, in the 19th century, when a lot of white people came to this country, they were, French, they were Irish, they were Polish, they were Czech, they were Italian, right? And how white people gave up their cultures and their histories and their language in order to accept the position of white, right? It was so there has been great loss in white communities in order to get to whiteness, in order to get to this privilege. They had to give up so much. And that is something that white people need to dig into to really begin to find their own humanity. I've heard you say that so many times about how important that work is. Before you start going to work in Black and brown communities, you have to go back and deal with your own history, your own dehumanization, because you can't possibly help anybody else if you haven't dealt with
it. Because we've been learning that racism has to do with the hate groups,
right,
or bigotry. That's a side issue.
right,
You can be a bigot about sexism, but we've been conditioned. See, so they understand when they get privilege as white people, that's part of their being racialized and dehumanized. And when you get a privilege and you give up, you buy into a concept called white, which is a political term. White, all white mean is privilege. They don't do else. But if they would say they were Jewish, Irish, Italian, they gave up that. That's what gave them life. That's what gave them music, food, dance. White don't give you that. White just give you stuff. But that's not all you can be. You can be an anti-racist white person. Nobody get left off the. We're all Black, brown, everybody. We're perpetuating this stuff, and all of us are doing it. There's no one group at all. But for white people, they got to understand more strategically how to become more effective and more humanistic. They think around hanging around people of color. That's going to bring them more humanity. That don't bring them more humanity. Understand? That's like using people. They got to do something much deeper than that. And when white people challenge white people, that's when the risk really becomes seriously. But they're told not to do that. Mm-hmm. And they're told not to do that. They're told not to speak out against racism because that has to do with power, which means that they're speaking out the hand that's been feeding them. So they're not going to do that. But and they know that deep down in their psyche, they know that. And many people of color, we talk about racism all day long in our sleep, about racism. Sometimes we have to know when not to say something and let some of our colleagues say something. Because sometimes they can make a bigger impact than we can because they got a different arrangement with those institutions.
Yes. So sometimes white people need to go out front. In our Family Connections program, we always talk about whether or not as a social worker, we are standing in front of, beside, or behind our clients. Sometimes we need to stand in front, right? Sometimes we need to
That's right.
Especially if you're white, sometimes you do need to step out in front and pave the way for the person of color, right, to come. But very often white people are afraid to do that because they don't know if it's their place, and they're not sure if they should do that. And so that is something that I think we need to learn some more about. I want to pivot really quickly back to this issue of power, because I know we're running out of time. We're going to have to invite you back for a second part to this, because we just get to everything I want to talk about. But when we work, I know you've done a lot of work with Joyce James, for example, in Texas, around child welfare and the impact of racism on children of color and families of color who are in the child welfare system. And when we work with a lot of social workers who work in child welfare, they talk about the discretion they have. They can make decisions about removing a child, about getting involving a family in the child welfare system, and so there's a lot of discretion. Social workers will tell you, well, I made the decision. I was able to decide that this family was not doing what they were supposed to do and not caring for this child properly. That discretion is another word for power in my mind, right? Because they can go in and they can make a decision to remove a child. And in a white family, they can make a decision that that parent's really okay. They're working really hard. They're trying very hard, right? That is power. What would you say to a social worker who says, I have discretion to decide if a child stays in their family or not? What do they need to do to make sure that that power that they are using is right, and that their analysis is right?
I would say you have to understand they're in a position of power.
In a position of power.
Position. And the system will put them in the position they want them in. You know, the other thing is that they would be considered a gatekeeper. And gatekeepers, and people have a real thing about gatekeeping. It sounds like it's a negative.
Yeah.
It has to be a negative.
Yeah.
You know, the janitor has some power, let you in and out of outdoors. The question that when you're in the social work arena and you got the discretion to help somebody or give them a good grade or lean toward a good grade, all this sort of thing, that's a concept of gatekeeping. Now, you want to be a liberated gatekeeper, which means you want to be a gatekeeper that the people that really help you to get where you are, you should make sure that they're intricately involved in your gatekeeping process. Because you can't, to be a liberated gatekeeper, you got to be accountable to the constituency that you give services to.
Yes.
Most time we accountable only to the one at the top level, but you got to do both. Your supervisors, your director, as well as community gives you the numbers and the money, because that's how we get our money, counting and measuring the number of people we're giving services to. The reason why it's such a game is that you can't tell anyone I'm working with the community and I've done such an effective job. We got less community. Can't, because you can't have less people you help. You always got to always have more and more numbers. You can't minimize the numbers. It becomes a game. So that's why we got to make sure this position of power we in. As an example, President Obama was in position of power.
True.
He was, he had power, but he was in position. A lot of people of color have really top positions, but they're only in a position of power, and the power really can put them in a position they want to, because the white dominant culture, that's where's the ultimate power in a race construct. That don't mean we don't have power as a people.
Right.
We got people power, but in a white dominant culture, the dominant culture in this country are white people, not just white men, because the women are benefactors of these white men. That's how the white men got here. So it's an arrangement. And the other piece about this position of power, the gatekeeper, as I said, years ago, they would enslave us, beat us, and all this sort of stuff. What they did, they'll hire a nonprofit organization with a 501c3, and all they got to do is they'll do what they call casework, not collective work, case by case. One time we should do collective work as social workers. Now they got to do it case by. It takes the rest of our lives to my casework. It becomes a game with numbers. It's a slow process, but whatever process you use, wherever you get to in position of power, you need to do it that opens up people's minds, get them to think critically. When you give them if you're doing that, then you do it however you want to do it, slow, but you got to help our community to get out of the programmatic thinking, help them to stimulate those minds, because oppression is on all of our community. So how do you give your services that lift that oppression? How do you be in a position of power? And if you have that kind of power, then you need to use it creatively, whether somebody know what you're doing or not. You just got to be creative in doing it. And how do you know you're being effective? What is your indicator? Your human indicators when you help somebody with a service, and you can see the process, which is not just one time, of them beginning to open up their minds, eyes getting much clearer, and then they start asking you questions as a social worker, start challenging you, which you may not like, but then that becomes your indicator you're right on track.
I love that. I love that. We will never program our way out of poverty, and we will never program our way out of racism. We can organize our way out of poverty, and we can organize our way out of racism. So I'm going to stop there because I know people have questions for Brother Ron. So I'm going to open it up. Stacy, do we have questions in the chat, or do people want to just come off and ask, come off mute and ask? You can maybe stop highlighting us.
Yep, sure can.
Okay. So we've had quite a discussion, and we just touched the tip of just the surface of all that we could talk about. But Brother Ron is just a fountain of knowledge. So What questions do you have for Brother Ron? And, so because we're short on time, let's not, wait, let's just come off mute and ask those questions quickly because we need to get as many in as we can.
We got 30 minutes. Don't worry.
Yeah, come on.
All right. Hi, Brother Ron. It's Monifa. It's nice to hear the both of you with your discussion. My quick question is, like racism is so like pervasive. It's so pervasive and so insidious and so impactful. How do you strike the balance with doing both, with doing the power analysis and I'm only going to say I'm a social worker as a needs analysis when you're working with people who are directly impacted by racism and they're struggling by it. And what I mean by that is I work with survivors of crime and some when by the time they come to us, they may need housing because they got shot and they don't want to live in the neighborhood that they got shot in, or they have like some real serious life pressing needs. So our approach is to address their needs first, their immediate needs first, so they can get stable. But I'm just trying to understand how you strike that balance between meeting people where they are and then also getting to a point of engaging in the power analysis. I'm just curious.
And first of all, you should deal with their needs.
Got it.
That's not even a discussion with their immediate needs. Best you can. Sometimes as a social worker, you don't have all the resources available. That's a big issue in our community. There's not enough money, there's not enough. So we're saying you should do that. Secondly, if you have a team of people working with you, helping you, your team ought at some point get some training that you don't normally get in the schools that you come from. And I would say to really understand this power dynamics, understand what organizing is. So I would say get 3 or 4 of your key people, because once you do that with your team, you'll have some common language and a common analysis. And then in that training, you'll understand the power. Let's say if we came to our training, we make sure you understand at least our power dynamic. Now, there may be other people that do it, but we're not here to we can say it's important to have some sense of it, not just you, your team. Because sometimes your staff are not on the same page. Might have graduated from the same school, same kind of degree. When it comes to the understanding racism and power, they're not on the same page. So once you get your team shaking your head like you're shaking it right now, see, because you got some team members can't shake their head like you're doing, because they're caught up in the white dominant culture. You got to shake their head like that. So I appreciate that rhythmic head shake you're giving me right now. That's encouraging. And then I would make sure that some of the people you work with in the community, you invite them to this training because they get it. Once you come in the workshop from the community and you be in a workshop with them, you'll see the dynamics that you never saw before, but they don't get a chance to show what they know. And then when you get them on the same page, then you really got a collective, a constituency that's aware, and you show them how to advocate. The last thing I would say is that most social workers don't understand organizing, yet they're doing it. Social work is an aspect of organizing, but in this case, you want to begin to do anti-race organizing. So in a full training, we could get more in details about this. And I'd love for you to get invited to come to one. We do them all over the country. And it just I just left Seattle yesterday working with about 80 people. Half the brothers have been incarcerated. They've been out now in Seattle. And we've done a training inside the prisons. And now they're helping their community right now. The challenge is that they're now being hired to work in these nonprofit organizations. I'm glad they're being hired, but you have to be very careful when you work with a community-based organization, because sometimes they just use to keep the arrangement in place. So that's the thing. So I'll stop here. But anyway, I'm answering a lot of things right now, but I'll stop here.
Brother Ron, just something that you said I think about a lot is I keep thinking about, we spend so much time with the people we work with, and we are so busy providing them with services, but where are we bringing them together to talk about the roots of the violence that they're experiencing? Because so many people think they're experiencing violence because they're in a bad community, they're in a poor community, something is wrong with them and their community, when in fact, the roots of that are so much bigger, deeper, wider, and go to structural racism and all the things that have happened in the city. But we're not talking to our clients about that. We're talking to them about them and their needs, which sends the message that they are the problem. So when do we start talking to them about the bigger issues, the structural issues that are impacting them, and begin to remove some of the shame and self-blame that they have, so they can begin to correctly put the attention where it belongs, which is in the wider structural systems that created the problems that they're experiencing, right? So somehow we've got to figure out how to begin building those conversations into, yes, socioeducation, building those conversations, because as Brother Ron says, the question is, are we putting people to sleep or are we waking them up?
But
And we're not talking about, go ahead, Brother Ron.
See, the schools that people come from has done a job on us. Very toxic. The system that we come from, they produce certification so we can come out and make some money and have a job, which is very important. But the system don't teach us to understand systemic racism, because that's what they are, you know. And even if it's school of color, we've been influenced by the white dominant culture. So we got to undo what has been done to us. We almost got to unlearn this stuff. But now when you get a degree, you say, hell, I ain't got to unlearn it. It took all this time to learn it. You tell me we call our training undoing racism. It has messed us up, messed our families up. I can tell you right now, one of the things we talk about in our training is to understand internalized oppression. All of the social workers, I don't know if they have classes on that. I've never been to school. I don't know if they on internalized oppression, but they need a class on that while they're in there, before they come out, because they work in all these diverse groups of color and don't understand it's toxic. So you're trying to give a good service. Then people they'll use the social workers, because the community, when it's oppressed and even internalized oppression, the community will turn on each other and will turn on the social worker as well. So we're not here to learn. You're not trained to talk about systemic racism, but all of the institutions are broken. But they're not going to tell you they're broken. But they work, so they develop programs for the people that has been affected by the institution. So yeah, no, I think we just got to undo some things, but people are ready to do that, I believe. I'll stop there.
My dream is to have a bunch of the people we work with come to an Undoing Racism workshop, really to develop a sort of coalition, a movement of people who are most impacted, who are ready to go out there and organize and do this work, because that's when I think we'll see real change. Other questions? Go ahead, Brother Ron.
No, I'm through.
Other questions?
Maybe there's no more.
Oh, I know there are questions. People are just being shy.
Brother Ron, I could listen to you for there's so much of every statement that you made, and I'm old school. I've been here and taken notes, and I'm just really, really grateful, and for you as well, Wendy. One of the things that really landed on my heart was sort of the education of whites about racism. And what concerns me is just the policy. Like, I think that as a few people started to think that was a good idea, then laws get passed that say you can't talk about the real history in history class, and you can't talk about the organizing movements. And so it worries me greatly, just the, I guess I should be encouraged that we're poking the system, and that's why it's rising up. But I'm seeing a real rise in policies that are pushing back on the discussions, the change of heart, the real work that needs to be done, sort of stifling not just our children, but even at, we got a national bill that's looking at medical schools. So it's not just our it's not just the children. I'm also worried about a lot of these policies. And I also was did some training with Saul Alinsky. So, that was a required book when I went to the School of Social Work. And so I get some of the community organizing, but I'm not as clear about what are some of the actions that are going to address some of the um, policy, I don't even know what to call it, but the attacks.
Let me just say to you, again, it's not either or. You know, you got to understand organizing. And most people don't understand organizing from a humanistic approach. Saul Alinsky taught training from a technical approach, very good at what he does. I learned so much from him. But the groups that come out of his method of organizing does not talk about the importance of culture or dealing with racism. So that's what made me start my own organization 40 some years ago. I learned from Saul Alinsky and I use a lot of his methods, but I know he didn't talk a lot about it for whatever reason. And so one is that you're right. There's a lot of policies now. The one that, for me, the state Supreme Court justice, the first Black woman in state Louisiana, we won the case, went to your Supreme Court, ruling in our favor. But now that we have a new governor now, he wants to take that out of the history books, you know, because he said, y'all won, we don't need it in there. So I'm saying what we're doing now, we're organizing here in New Orleans with some of our leadership, because a lot of those legislation come out. DeSantis is not the only one in Florida. They're following his pattern right now. They know if it takes a history from us, then we move vulnerable to death, to oppression. So I think you got to use, as Giselle said, use your organizing, see, organizers bring hope to people. So, you know, most social workers, they do organizing, but it's not stressed to them because they want to continue to help people, not for people to help themselves. See, so we've got to shift that thinking. To me, our hope is our community. Now, if you're going to get a policy, it's got to be an anti-racist policy. If you're going to get legislation, it's got to be an anti-racist. Any policy, even though it might be good, if we don't have power to make sure that that policy stays implemented in a good way, the system will use that good policy better than we can use it. So I'm in agreeing with you. I just think that we got to keep, because I'm 82 years of age and I still got to do it. I'm still, you don't stop doing it. You know, I'm a leader too. You know, and I don't know you, but I'm assuming you're a leader and an organizer. But we have to know how to differentiate those roles and what does those roles mean. If you ask somebody what organizing is, they can say anything. Organizing is a good motivator. Organizing is a good educator. Organizing is a strategic agitator. Know how to piss people off. I'm sure y'all got some skills on that Zoom like that. I can tell, right? It's about feeling the vibes, but you got to use it strategically. You just can't get pissed off, because when you do that, all you're doing is doing something for yourself. When you piss somebody off, you're trying to bring our community in. Strategic agitation. But most of us have a difficult time in bringing our community in. That's a good sign when you can bring your constituency in. That's going to give you the hope. But if you're trying to do it by yourself, it won't happen, because we keep doubting what we can do. It took you a while to get where you're at now, but you got to build that base, even amongst your colleagues. Because we want the community to come together, but our staff don't come together. So I would just leave it at that. I'm just saying that with time we can talk more in depth, you know, about the things that are being done right now around the country.
And we have to ask ourselves, why is history so threatening? Why is history so threatening? Because we know that if our children understand their history, no matter what race they are, if they can really understand the history of this country, that is where the humanity comes in. But the more we can take it, we can't talk about enslavement, and we can't talk about Jim Crow, we can't talk about the things that dehumanize us, then our next generation won't grow up with that humanity, right? And that's why history is so much under attack, because it's powerful. And that's why that's one of the principles of the People's Institute is understanding history, because when we understand history and we can pass that on, then we can raise children who are in touch with their own humanity, and they can make different decisions about what the society will look like in the future. That's powerful stuff. And Brother Ron, I just have to say, I think you've been 82 for the last 5 years. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well,
You've been saying you're 82 for a long time.
I feel it though. Sometimes when that weather acts up, I feel it in my bones.
I understand.
Yeah. They say weather got to do with it, but I think it does, you know. And my wife and I both be struggling with some of these.
I know.
But I think what keep me alive, keep me going is the work.
Yeah.
organizing very therapeutic.
Yeah.
You know, I think social work can be very therapeutic, but we got to go much deeper because we got to cut loose on where we've been taught to help others and don't realize we're being helped. Because the white culture is done this internalized for children of color. Our mothers at an early age have been treated by the health system in a very disrespectful way. And for mothers having a baby of color, the baby can feel the disrespect to the mother. And then once a child comes in this world, they start being taught inferior, calling our children slow learners when they, a learning disability when there's a teaching disability. They tell our kids they start labeling our children. That's why we can't keep calling people minorities. Minorities don't just mean numbers, it means less than. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can create your reality. So we keep playing the game like with foundation, philanthropic groups. I've seen groups say, I'm gonna get a grant. I'm gonna call them disadvantaged, at risk. Well, linguistic racism keeps the systemic in place. In order to keep systemic racism in place, you need forms of racism: individual, institutional, cultural, and linguistic. That's what keeps power in place. And we would perpetuate them with good intentions to help our community, but using language. We saying all I do is get the money first. I ain't gonna keep calling my people that. But people been calling our community minority. So we treat each other as less than. So language is very, very important.
Yeah, we have to, and we really have to think about that when we are writing grants, because I have gone back and looked at some of our proposals and been kind of quite horrified and embarrassed at the language that we have used when we talk about communities. And, we want to meet the requirements of our funders, because funders understand, marginalized, disinvested, vulnerable communities. But we have to ask ourselves, what are we really saying? What are we putting out into the atmosphere? And how would those community members feel to know that that's what we use? That's how we describe them in order to get the money we got. By the way, when we get money, most of it goes to the institution and the salaries of the people going into the community, not to the community. So we called you all these names and we painted you in this particular way so we could get money to pay our own mortgages.
Yeah, another thing when it is that a lot of people, you gotta have a little bit of age on you. A lot of young people may not remember. Years ago, we used to talk about the Black community as crabs in a barrel. Say one try to get to the top, the other one pull somebody down. But it ain't so much the crabs in the barrel, it's the barrel we have never studied. The barrel is the one, we talk about the people inside the barrel, but we got to have a discussion. What is this barrel about? When they put a barrel together, put iron things around it, and when you use that kind of analogy, crabs in a barrel, I'm talking about when you study crabs really stay together because that's the way they fight against predators in the water. So they got to stay together. All these different kind of analogies really is different, Any other thoughts from anybody?
Yeah. Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Wendy, I want to return to, I believe it was Allison put something in the chat. Or no, sorry, Christine. She was asking about how you suggest working with white children to address racism. Just agreeing with the fact that that work needs to be done too, and just like thinking through, what does that look like? Was that therapy, individual group, or something else?
I would think there needs to be, if somebody really interested in that, there's other white people need to come together. See, a good organizer knows how to read what's going on in the room, that kind of thing. You can almost read this Zoom a little bit, see a certain body language. So so white people, we found over the years, when we first started doing this work 44 years ago, we had a lot of white people who were social workers who just wanted, because they like this and talking about racism and really want to help, but sometimes they help would get in the way. So one day, this was 40-some years ago, we said, look, you don't y'all go in the back room, talk about racism, just give us a break, because all this help is hurting us. So they went back there, and what we realized, for white people to come together to talk about racism is a very difficult task. I didn't know that till we asked them to go in the room and work together. They could not work without some people of color hanging around. It was unbelievable. But since that time, they started a group called European Descent, DISSENT. They dissent how the system is using them. So we have a national, almost some of the international, but no, a national group of white activists that's a part of our network that's now in the process of developing a history book for young white kids. And we can give it a contact, but you got to give it some other white people that's ready to talk about racism. Most white, even the activists who's out there demonstrating to my Black Lives Matter, everything else, when it comes for them to come together to talk about racism, they usually don't do it. But so if this one person is interested, your biggest job is to identify 3 or 4 white people to work together on how to begin to develop a strategy. White people are smart and everything else. When it comes to doing racism, they get a little confused, you know, but they're in charge of everything. So I would just say, get 3 or 4 white people together and begin to strategize. And we got some white people around the country that works with us that could definitely lend you a hand, you know, but we think that's a good way to start because we need more white young people involved with an anti-racist analysis.
Yeah, we can share, Stacy, just remind me, we can share the information about European Descent. Is Sandy Barnaby still leading that? She's leading that, right?
Well, she's playing, I think, a big role, but we got a lot of other people.
Okay,
And we can give you a bunch of names.
okay, we'll send out some information.
We got one in Seattle, New York, Connecticut,
Okay.
all over the country, you know.
I think Heather had her hand up. Did you have your hand up, Heather? Did I imagine that?
I did. I am in a process of starting conversations with neighbors, and it's a switch for me. And what you said earlier, Brother Ron, about, you know, social workers are organizing and they don't know how to organize. I'm just curious if you could share a little story of somebody who did some successful community organizing in a neighborhood.
Yes. Well, here in New Orleans, if you ever get to, there's a neighborhood called St. Thomas Housing Development Projects. That's in the uptown area of New Orleans. Mostly all public housing residents, mostly Black women and with their children. So I was organizing in New Orleans dealing with slum landlords all over the city. And I got people saw me on TV doing this work, and they would call me to different areas, come help us out with our problem with the slum landlord or a bad housing authority manager. So I used to me and several other people, we meet with these residents, and we began to bring this analysis to some of the leadership. They were called a tenant council. And from that, the residents began to see what was going on. There were 20 community organizations in that neighborhood helping, social workers, there were church groups, all giving services, which was good to that community. But what we found out, so what we decided to do, the leader of the residents, the tenant council, so you know what I'm going to do now that we kind of awakened, we could be more effective if they would work together, these 20 groups, because they're all helping us, but they're doing it individually. Not only that, all these groups are getting money based on the number of residents that were living there, but they don't. So they wrote a letter with our direction, the leadership of the tenant council, asked all these groups to come together and just a meeting. We'll talk about how we work together. All the folks came except one, which was a clinic. I'm on the board of that clinic right now, one of the few federal qualified clinics in the country, and all the doctors are required to come to our training. So when they didn't come, all came but one. What we did some research, found out who was funding this clinic. We found out who was funding them, so we sent them another letter with a CC copy to the funders. They was at the next meeting, and for at least 7 or 8 years, we formed a group called the Consortium in this particular area. All these groups came together, and we'd meet once or twice a month. We had a powerful group. We stopped the police from coming in and then just taking Black men whenever they wanted to. We had formed a Black men's group, Black Men United for Change, came from some of these children, and police wouldn't come in and do what they did before. Any organizations that was a part of this consortium, including us, which I got a little attitude, they would give us a grade, like A, B, and C. And one day they gave me a C, and I was one of the organizers of the other groups. I got a little attitude. And they said, well, Ron, you said you think the community, the leadership, you ought to quit traveling so much, but every time you go out of town. And they had me right. You know, you keep leaving the community. And I didn't like that idea. So what I had to do to deal with that, I had to make sure that I developed leadership that could stay here while I do my traveling. But everything depended on me. They were correct. They gave me a grade, and my grade got better after a while, you know. But that was a mid. Now the projects came down because they used that to knock the projects down. What came out of that was leadership development. We have men and women all over the country, part of our training team. They're in different cities working for big groups. Leadership, it ain't so much just saving housing. A good organization knows how to save the people. So we actually, we woke them up. They can see the bigger picture. Now they advocate for them. So they don't know how to prevent from their children, from themselves, wherever they're at in the world. This was, I don't know how long ago. And some of them are still around. Is that helpful? I can't hear you.
Okay, Heather.
Sorry, I had to find my mouse.
Okay.
I have a question about, because you mentioned all the different organizations and you mentioned the tenant council. When you first started interacting with the tenant council, did the tenant council feel like that their time wasn't worth it? You know, because a lot of communities, they have like, 5 people that have been doing the work for 100 decades. And then there's other, with any collective action, right? You got free riders. But did the tenant council have a pretty wide following, or was it just a group of people? I'm wondering if you had to face the thought that, well, there's no point in doing anything. Nothing's going to change. So I'm not even going to be involved.
Yes. Yeah, apathy, all that was there. I didn't understand it at the time, but as an organizer, I'm consistent. I got to stay on the case. We call it a protracted struggle. You don't get tired. You don't get burnt out. You get burnt out when your vision ain't clear what you're doing. I was an organizer and a leader. I had a vision. I was practicing principles. I didn't know I was practicing principles. We had 9 or 10 people meet all the time. And the problem is I didn't know they were fighting each other. And I didn't understand that because it wasn't them. I'm the one who was organizing them, and some things I didn't understand. I would call a meeting for them to come out to a meeting, and I'd have a speaker, I'd have food and a door prize. Hell, and they still wouldn't come. So after a while, I got mad at them, but I shouldn't have got mad at them. The problem, I should have got mad at myself because I had to say to myself, you wanted them to come out. You were ineffective in knowing how to get them to come out. But I ain't gonna criticize myself. I'm the one getting them. So then I had to learn what internalized oppression. I'm still learning that because we only touch on it in our workshop. Internalized oppression. Why would they fight each other? Yeah, I'm helping and they fight me. We only had a small following, but there was a large constituency. We had to get this following in order to talk about anybody else following. Because the more people you bring in, the more pathology you're dealing with, more sickness. See, we've been sick a long time, and they've been helping us, including all of us on the Zoom. That stuff is in us. I didn't understand internalized oppression. I didn't understand the colorism, light skin versus dark skin. Does that go on if it's in our community? Give a head shake. Does that go on in our community? We don't talk about it. In terms of colorism. Then you got ethnocentrism that Dr. Wendy talked about. You got blacks don't like Latino like black, you got some African like none of us. That's called ethnocentrism. Then there's another one called protectionism. See, in our workshop, we do a 3-day workshop. We tell all white people that they're racist because they got unearned privilege. And when that happens, black and brown folks start their sickness kick in because we start protecting the white people, getting there hugging them. Well, they weren't talking about you because you're a good white. Say, sit your ass down. This ain't nothing but a goddamn workshop. They're going to be fine after this workshop. That's called protectionism. That's a sickness in us. Another one is called exaggerated visibility. All this stuff was playing out, but I didn't know what it was. Why they fighting each other? Why they talking about me? Why they talking about, I didn't understand it. Another exaggerated visibility, when you've been invisibilized by the power analysis, by the system, it devalues us. So I'm gonna put jewelry on me. I'm gonna put Gucci on me. I'm gonna put Michael Kors. I'm gonna say, you're gonna see me. That don't just happen with our community, young people, gold, and that's called exaggerated visibility because we've been invisible. We also been devalued by the power analysis. So we're gonna put some value on us. You can be a black woman running a black university. If you don't be careful, they'll see you as the dean, but they'll call you the cleanup lady. Ouch. So you got to exaggerate. What Dr. Wendy's saying, you got to exaggerate. You got to come to work with a hairstyle where you got to balance. See, I'm in charge. This is exaggerated visibility. These are some manifestations that go on that a good social worker can understand, but they don't teach it at social work school or any school. So we have to learn what keeps, because I got tired of every time I called a meeting, nobody would show up. Then when I called it, they'd fight each other. Talk about everybody. I didn't understand that. That with the power analysis don't only create a needs, it creates a pathology. So most people develop programs to deal with the need, but not with the sickness. Because you can help the community with a need.
Oh, no.
He froze.
Stop again.
Disconnected.
He was on a roll too.
He was.
Good roll too.
I'm like, we're out of time. What are we gonna do? We're gonna have to have a part 2, y'all. We're just gonna have to have a second part. What do y'all think?
Yes.
Agreed.
Get him back. I'm gonna have
Yes.
to invite him back to I'm just gonna, I know people have to hop off and I get that, but I'm gonna wait for him to come back in so that we can invite him back. Did you all find this to be a useful discussion?
Very.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just a wealth of knowledge, just a wealth of knowledge. In his 82 years. I swear he's been 82 for like 5 years. He will be back. But yeah, this has been really rich, and there's so much more we could ask him. A lot of people don't know that I am privileged to be writing his book, his memoir. Maura and I are working on this. It's been a big, tough project. But we are getting there. And so all of this stuff that he's talking about is in that book. All of the 10 principles, it's all laid out principle by principle. So you can and I'm hoping that we can, include some of that in our community organizing that we are doing. So, okay, there you are.
I'm sorry about that. I got this iPad. It don't act right, I guess.
No, we're glad we wanted to hold on because we wanted to be able to thank you for this great space that you created, this great conversation. I think we're going to have to ask you to come back for a second go round because we have so much more to talk about and people, just really learned so much. So I want to thank you and Stacy, I'm going to try to work with you and Maura to set up another time. Would you be willing to come back to do this one more time with us?
For me, it's a pleasure, especially if folks are interested in strengthening the community. I guess I want people to do this as something, I really want the social workers because I think they are on the front line. And I really believe what's going on in the country right now, Wendy, that if social workers and organized can step up a little bit more, I think we could be the savior for this planet. I really believe that. And the community got to be involved with us. And y'all much closer to community than a lot of other people. But sometimes we don't think we're that strong. But I would like to talk more about how to build that base. And
Okay.
that's what I would want to spend my time on because I just don't want to give people some information unless it's going to be applied to with their families or their community because I think that's our hope, because I talk to a lot of people, but that's what I really do. If people are really serious about understanding and organizing and because this can relate to their families. We know some of the people on this Zoom who have children are dealing with some of the same dynamics. All these issues we're talking about, because we get feedback on it. And we do this training for young people too. We do it for real young people because this work is intergenerational. I'm saying to you, I'd be glad to come back, but if it's to build community,
Okay. So the next time you come back, we will be talking specifically about how we build that base and how we work with the people we work with to really, for them to wake up and to activate their power and for them to lead this organizing that we need to.
Right.
So that's our topic for next time. Okay.
And relate to their families and hopefully they can bring their families to a training at some point because if you have a significant other, they can create division within the family because they argue with each other, won't have an analysis about race. Everybody think they're right.
Yeah.
So, but thank you all for.
Thank you.
I got pumped up because it's the right questions you're asking. But what's her name? Heather.
Oh, that was Heather. Okay. Heather was asking a lot of good questions.
Yeah. You want
and
you want to
good questions.
have another one too in Louisiana with a dictator down here and was able to change dynamics in the country. So it'd be another example of how the community took over and it made a big difference. So
Thank
You,
you.
thank y'all so much for having me, and I'm excited about it. And hopefully, folks got something out of it that can strengthen families.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brother
Thank you so
Ron.
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you